At 62, I learned that the word mine can survive in a family for 30 years and still mean nothing the day someone wants to take it from you. I was in the garden, cutting the last of the dahlias before the frost took them, when my phone buzzed against the porch railing. My daughter, "Mom, we're doing the wedding reception at your place. June 14th. We already booked the photographer. I read it twice. I set down the shears. Out on the lake, a loon called once and went quiet, the way they do before a storm rolls down from the ridge. I typed back the steadiest sentence I'd written in years. Then you'll want to start looking at tents, because I won't be hosting. I put the phone face down on the railing and went back to the dahlias. She called 11 times before dinner. I let it ring out. The 11th time, I almost answered. Old habit, the one that says a mother always answers. But I didn't. I made tea instead, the way I do most evenings up at the lake, and I sat on the dock until the light went the color of weak coffee, and I told myself this was nothing, just a misunderstanding. She'd cool off. What I didn't know yet was that 2 days later I'd open my email and find a message that wasn't meant for me, forwarded by mistake by my own son-in-law, and that it would tell me exactly what my family had been planning behind my back for the better part of a year. People around Halton County have known my name longer than they've known my face. For 36 years, I ran the kind of catering business that does weddings, funerals, hockey banquets, the works. Start in a church basement kitchen with 2 electric roasters, end up with a staff of 14 and a walk-in cooler the size of a garage. I sold the business 3 years ago, not because I was tired of the work, but because Robert was sick, and some things matter more than orders for 200 butter tarts. I won't get into all of that yet. What matters first is who I became at home, because that's where this story actually starts. My mother believed love came with conditions attached, a little hook buried in every kindness so she could reel you back in whenever she needed something. I swore on my own wedding day that I would never run my family that way. So I went in the opposite direction my whole life. I gave without keeping score. I helped without being asked twice. I told myself that was generosity. It took me a long time to understand. It was something closer to training my own children to expect that the answer would always be yes. The cottage was Robert's project before it was ever mine. He built the screened porch himself. The summer Catherine turned 9, swearing at mosquitoes the whole time in that low, patient way he had. He's been gone 14 months now. The place still smells like cedar and his pipe tobacco, even though he hadn't smoked in 20 years, and I've aired the windows out every spring since he passed. I come up here most weekends to be nobody's anything. No schedule, no 30-place settings to plan. Just the water and the dock he sanded by hand on his knees one August, and a silence I had to learn to like. I was 62 years old. My knees still worked. My mind was sharper than most people half my age, and I had been chronically, almost comically underestimated by the very people who shared my last name. Quiet does not mean weak. Quiet means you're watching and waiting and keeping your own counsel until the moment counting matters. I had spent 5 years being patient with my daughter's household. I was about to find out exactly what that patience had quietly cost me, and that the bill had been accruing the entire time, with interest. Let me go back 5 years, because none of this makes sense without it. Catherine's husband, Mitchell, lost his position at the plant the spring their second was born. Layoffs hit the whole line that year, half the town's husbands and wives both, and nobody in Halton was spared the worry of it. Catherine had just had little Rosalind, and their oldest, Desmond, was barely 4, and they were frightened in the particular way young parents get frightened when the mortgage is due and the job listings have nothing in them. I was their mother. I did what mothers do. I had a second property in town. The house Robert and I raised Catherine in before we downsized to the bungalow and kept the cottage as our real home. I'd been renting it out, modestly, mostly to cover the taxes and upkeep. I told Catherine and Mitchell to move in, stay as long as you need, get back on your feet. I moved my own things fully up to the cottage, gave them the run of the place, and told myself a young family needs more room than an old widow does. Here is the part nobody ever thought to ask me about. I never once changed the deed. Why would I? It was my house, deeded to me alone after Robert passed, sitting in a living trust I'd set up with my lawyer the year he was diagnosed. A trust that named, very specifically, Desmond and Rosalind as the eventual beneficiaries of that property, not their parents. I'd told Catherine the broad strokes of this once, years ago, over a glass of wine at Christmas. I assumed it had registered. I was wrong about that, the way you're wrong about a crack in the foundation, until the day the whole wall tells you otherwise. 5 years is a long time to live somewhere for free and start thinking of it as yours. I noticed small things first. Catherine stopped calling to ask how I was managing the property taxes. She just paid them straight, without telling me, like a person paying their own bill. Mitchell repainted the shutters, a color I'd never have chosen, didn't mention it, didn't ask. Small things, the kind of things you let go because making an issue of paint feels petty when your daughter is finally sleeping through the night again and the kids are healthy and the worst of the layoffs are behind them. Then, last spring, Mitchell got a new position, better than the old one, management this time, a real title on the door. I was glad. I thought, naturally, that meant the conversation about moving on would start soon. It didn't. If anything, the house got more settled. New curtains. A swing set went up in the backyard, cemented into the ground, the kind you don't put in if you're planning to leave. I told myself, they'll bring it up when they're ready. I'd raised Catherine not to overstep, and I tried to live by my own rule, even when overstepping would have been the more honest thing to do. What I didn't know, what that misdirected email would tell me in language so plain it took my breath away, was that somewhere in that year, the conversation in that household had shifted from when do we move out to how do we make sure we never have to. The text about the wedding was the first sign I had, the surface of something much larger underneath, like the dorsal fin of a thing you don't yet understand, is enormous. Rosalind, my granddaughter, had gotten engaged in February to a perfectly nice young man named Patrick, who worked in agricultural insurance, and called me Mrs. Calloway with old-fashioned politeness that I appreciated more than he probably realized. The wedding itself was set for late summer, a real one, a hall, a band, the whole production, and I was looking forward to every minute of it. The reception, separate, smaller, just family and close friends. Catherine had said when she first floated the idea back in March, was the thing that had apparently mutated, sometime between March and that text on the porch railing, into a sit-down dinner for 60 people at my cottage. My cottage, the one place in this world that was entirely, unambiguously mine. Nobody had asked. That was the part that sat in my chest like a stone, the whole drive back into town. 2 days later, the part I turned over and over until I understood it wasn't really about the wedding at all. I want to be fair here, because fairness has always mattered to me, even toward people who haven't been fair to me. I don't think Catherine set out, that first year, to take anything from me. I think what happened is slower and sadder than a plot. I think 5 years of free rent, a property that quietly behaved like it belonged to them. A mother who never once said enough now. It's time, all of it built up the way silt builds up in a riverbed, until one day the water just runs differently and nobody can say exactly when it changed. But knowing why a thing happened doesn't mean you have to let it keep happening. The morning after the 11 missed calls, Catherine showed up at the cottage in person. I heard her car on the gravel before I saw her, and I had just enough time to put the kettle on before she came through the screen door without knocking, the way she's done since she was 16. Mom, what is going on with you? 60 people are expecting this. 60 people are expecting something nobody discussed with me, I said. Sit down. There's tea. She didn't sit. It's a wedding reception. It's family. I thought you'd be thrilled. I would have been, I said, and I meant it. If anyone had asked me whether I wanted 60 people in my home, whether the dock would hold a tent cruise equipment, whether I even wanted to spend my granddaughter's reception turking instead of sitting at a table with a glass of wine like everyone else. I spent 36 years catering other people's best days, Catherine. I did not expect to spend Rosalind's organizing my own kitchen like staff. Nobody's asking you to be staff. We'll hire people. With what money? I asked, gently, because I genuinely didn't know the answer, and because I had begun, over the previous 48 hours, to wonder about a number of things I'd never thought to ask. That question landed wrong. I watched it land wrong, watched something close in her face, the way a door closes when somebody doesn't want you to see what's in the room. "We'll figure it out," she said. "We always figure it out." "You've been figuring it out in my house for 5 years," I said. I hadn't planned to say it. It came out anyway, quiet, not unkind, just true. "I think it might be time we talked about that too." She left without finishing her tea. I sat on the porch a long time after her car pulled out, watching the lake do what it does, indifferent to all of us, and I felt something in my chest that I want to be honest about, because I think a lot of women my age feel it and don't say it out loud. I felt afraid. Not of Catherine. Afraid of what it meant about the last 5 years, that I genuinely did not know what my own daughter would do next. 2 days later, the email came. Mitchell forwarded it to me by mistake. A thread meant for his brother, the subject line still reading RE. Mom's house, and underneath that, 6 messages deep, was a conversation that rearranged everything I thought I understood about my own family. I am not going to pretend I read it calmly. I read it standing at my kitchen counter with my coat still on, and I had to sit down halfway through, and I read it again after that, slower, to make sure I hadn't imagined the worst of it. They'd been talking, the two of them, Catherine and Mitchell, about what would happen when Mom can't manage the property anymore. Not if. When. There was a line from Mitchell, casual as a grocery list, about how his cousin worked at a long-term care facility 2 towns over and could keep an eye out for when a spot opens up, just so we're not scrambling. There was a line from Catherine about how the reception was actually a good test. If she balks at 60 people for 1 weekend, imagine how she'll be about actually handing things over. And a reply from Mitchell agreeing that it would be useful to see how she reacts under pressure. Under pressure. They had engineered the wedding reception, at least in part, as a test of my competence. 60 guests, full catering, a tent on the lawn, the dock load-bearing for an evening of foot traffic. And somewhere in their minds, my reaction to all of it was data, evidence to be filed away for a conversation about my mind, my independence, my house, that they had apparently already started having without me. There was more. A line about the trust. Mitchell had clearly heard about it secondhand and gotten the details wrong, was under the impression the house would simply pass to Catherine outright, and was already discussing, lightly, almost as a joke, whether it made more sense to get ahead of it and have me sign something now, while she's still sharp, before anyone can say she wasn't competent to do it. A power of attorney, dressed up as paperwork, dressed up as helping me. I sat with my coat on for a long time after I finished reading. I want to tell you what I felt, because I think the women watching this will recognize it. It wasn't only anger, though there was plenty of that. It was a colder thing underneath the anger. The particular grief of realizing that people you raised, people you fed and drove to hockey practice and sat up with through fevers, had begun to talk about you the way you talk about a problem to be managed rather than a person to be asked. I did not call Catherine that night. I did not call anyone. I went and stood on the dock in the dark in my coat, and I let the cold come up through my boots until I couldn't feel my feet. And somewhere in that hour, I stopped being afraid and started being something else. Clear, maybe, is the word. Clear the way water gets clear once the silt finally settles. Here is what they did not know, and what I had never had reason to spell out for them, because a mother does not generally narrate her own legal affairs at the dinner table. The trust I'd set up with Robert's lawyer, a sharp, careful woman named Adeze Okonkwo, who had been our family's lawyer for 2 decades, and who I trusted the way you trust very few people, named Desmond and Rosalind as the beneficiaries of the townhouse, in equal shares, upon my death or upon my own decision to transfer it, whichever came first. Catherine and Mitchell had never been named on that property at all, not as tenants with rights, not as heirs, nothing. They had been guests in a house that belonged, ultimately, to their own children. The cottage, separately, was mine outright, no trust, no encumbrance, mine the way Robert had built it to be mine, board by board. There was no power of attorney to sign, because I had never needed one, and there would be none coming, because I was, in fact, entirely infuriatingly competent, and I intended to demonstrate that in a way they would not be able to misread. I called Adeze the next morning. We talked for an hour. I will not walk you through the legal particulars. That's not what this story is for. But I will tell you what I decided to do, because I think the decision itself is the thing worth passing on. I did not change the trust. Desmond and Rosalind had done nothing wrong, and they would still inherit that property exactly as planned, untouched by their parents' scheming. What I did was give Catherine and Mitchell 90 days written notice to vacate the townhouse. Generous, more generous than the law required. More generous, frankly, than they had been with me. I had Adeze draft it properly, formally, the kind of letter that doesn't leave room for argument about what was meant. And the reception. I told Rosalind herself, not Catherine, because Rosalind deserved better than to hear it secondhand. I told her I would be honored to host her and Patrick for an intimate dinner at the cottage, just the two of them and Robert's memory in the cedar walls, any weekend they liked. But the 60-person catered event her mother had planned, without asking me, would need a different venue. And I would be glad to recommend 3 good halls in the area, because I knew every caterer and venue manager in Halton County by their first name, and I intended to put that 36 years of goodwill to use for my granddaughter, properly, the way it should have been done from the start. Rosalind cried on the phone, not the way I expected. She said, "Grandma, I didn't even know it was your cottage they were planning to use like that. Mom told me you'd offered." That sentence told me everything I needed to know about how this had been managed on the other side, and it told me, too, that my granddaughter had been just as much a piece on the board as I had. The 90 days were not peaceful. There were calls. There was a visit from Mitchell that started reasonable and ended with him telling me, red in the face, in my own kitchen, that I was punishing them for one bad text, which I noted, calmly, was a very small way to describe a conversation about long-term care facilities and pre-signed paperwork that he hadn't known I'd seen. His face went the color of the dahlias I'd been cutting the day this all started. Catherine, to her credit, eventually came to me without Mitchell on a Tuesday, and she didn't argue. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table, the cottage table, where she'd done her homework as a girl. And she cried in a way I hadn't seen since her father's funeral, and she said, "I don't even know when I started thinking of that house as ours. I think I just stopped seeing you as someone who'd need it back." I told her that was the most honest thing she'd said to me in 5 years, and that I appreciated it, and that it did not undo the 90 days, but it was a start. They found a rental, 2 streets over, within 7 weeks, smaller, a real lease with their names on it, their own paint colors to choose if they wanted. No swing set cemented into a yard that was never theirs to cement anything into. Mitchell's new salary, it turned out, could absolutely cover it. The money had never been the obstacle. The obstacle had been 5 years of free rent that nobody, including me, had ever put a clear end date on. Rosalind's wedding went beautifully, at a hall on the water 20 minutes from town, run by a man named Donovan, who'd apprenticed under me 18 years ago and refused to let me pay full price for the room. I sat at the family table in a green dress Robert always liked, and I danced once with Desmond, who is 17 now and surprisingly good at it, and I did not lift a single tray all evening. I host the smaller dinners myself now, the ones at the cottage. Birthdays, the odd Sunday supper, never more than 8 at the table, always asked for in advance, always with someone other than me doing the dishes. Catherine and I talk most weeks. It isn't what it was before any of this, and I've made my peace with that, because what it was before wasn't actually closeness. It was just me being useful and calling that love. I still see Desmond and Rosalind every week that I can. That part I protected, deliberately, the whole way through, because whatever happened between the adults in this story, the children did not engineer any of it, and they did not deserve to lose their grandmother over a mistake their parents made about what was theirs to plan. People ask me sometimes, the few who know the whole of it, whether I regret giving Catherine and Mitchell the house in the first place. I don't, not really. I regret only that I let 5 years of silence stand in for a conversation that should have happened in year one. A simple, ordinary conversation about how long, and on what terms, and what happens after. Quiet is not the same as kind. I learned that on my own dock, in the dark, with my boots full of cold lake water, at 62 years old, and I have not forgotten it since.